So, my name is Mārcis, I'm a software developer at ZAP, mainly working on authentication solutions, and I will be speaking about automated web app scanning using ZAP Automate. So, alright, first of all, why do we need automated scanning? Well, any automation lets us scan frequently without any friction. So automated scanning can quickly analyze large volumes of code and also large volumes of attack vectors. And of course, automated scanning is nowhere near as effective as manual scanning done by a professional, and definitely doesn't guarantee that the tested application is fully secure. But it is definitely a valuable tool that we can use in our testing process. And let's start out with a question for you. Who knows what is ZAP? Who has done some penetration testing? Alright, I see some hands. Okay, cool. Well, for those who doesn't know, well, it's a tool for dynamic analysis of web applications. Basically acts as a middle party between your browser and the application. It intercepts the messages and allows testers to identify vulnerabilities such as like SQL injections, blah blah blah. And also ZAP can be integrated into automated scanning processes such as CI/CD pipelines, which I will talk about a little further. And first question, how does ZAP work? Well, what it basically does is crawl through URLs through your application and scans for when vulnerabilities found on those URLs. And yes, it stands between the tester's browser and the application and modifies the contents of the requests if needed, and then forwards those requests to the application. And why do we choose ZAP for our project? Why not something else? Well, the main reason is free. It's open source, making it accessible for developers and organizations of all sizes. There's no limitations such as like 100 users you have to pay, which is very cool. And also it's customizable, so you can add your own scripts, your own customizations. As it's open source, you can change the code as much as you want, no worries. And overall, it's a reliable tool for automated testing. And what is ZAP Automate? Well, it's an extension of ZAP, designed to streamline and automate web application security. 3 bullet points. It's an extension of ZAP. It automates tests, and there is just one configuration file you have to configure to start all of those tests. And for the scope of our project, what we did at ZAP, well, it involved implementing automated scanning for a web application for a state institution. And that involved developing authentication scripts, configuration files, testing and validation. And a quick answer to 2 questions. Why is authentication needed? It is needed because we need to authenticate the user to see the whole web application, because in most web applications, some features are hidden which you cannot access through an authenticated person's point of view. So you have to authenticate if you want to get a full scope of the web application and scan it fully. And why is configuration needed? Well, that's for the ZAP Automate protocol, so we can integrate that into CI/CD pipelines. So we can add some configurations such as like the strength of the test, the type of the reports to be generated, and stuff like that. And a quick recap of the whole task, so everyone's following me here. Well, the project aims to enhance the ZAP tool. By that I mean like add configuration and scripts to be integrated in the state institution, so we can provide security to the state institution with tests in the CI/CD pipelines, and also for APIs. And let's get to the nice part finally, execution. We had to develop authentication scripts, which were like a necessary part, as I said before, because we need to get like a full scan of the application. And right, this process involved creating scripts for a state portal, which is under management by the state institution, and also for APIs to authenticate against them. So for state portal authentication, we used Selenium, which is basically like a tool that automates user input. It like stimulates the user interactions and saves processes the response from the browser. And also other options we could have used involved JavaScript and Zest. But we didn't choose those, as Selenium was the superior choice. JavaScript was not chosen because it was really, really complex to reproduce all the requests made by the browser. It involved several domains and cookies, and we didn't want to deal with that. We just chose the easy option. And Zest, which is a scripting language involved in ZAP, integrated in it already, we didn't choose that because, same as JavaScript, was really difficult to replicate the authentication in that scripting language. And for API authentication, quite similar to the state portal authentication, but we didn't use Selenium, we used just basic server-to-server requests within JavaScript. And the script was not difficult at all, it was pretty simple. We just used the client credentials flow of Auth 2.0. And the ZAP supports Open API imports. We just used those, imported Swagger definitions within ZAP, and started scanning. And as far as testing and validation goes, we did testing and validation from the ZAP GUI, the graphical interface, and also Docker containers. Well, initially, we used the GUI as it was more simple to understand. And we used that to configure ZAP for the initial testing, so we could validate if the authentication works and if we configured everything correctly. And throughout this GUI, we configured the scripts, the scanning parameters, etc. And here's like a little picture of how the GUI looks. I will quickly run through the points. First is just a basic toolbar. Second is all the options we can use within GUI. Third is where you can configure your context in all the sites. You can include and exclude sites from the automated scan. And fourth is like a quick start for beginners, where you can like just enter one URL and begin the scan. Fifth is the proxy history, basically all the sites which you visited while proxying through ZAP. And also you can use this interface through Docker. You can use a tool called WebSpring. You can just start the same interface through a browser and start ZAP from there. You don't have to use the desktop application. And as far as the configuration files go, we used the ZAP Automate protocol, and the project requirements involved creating ZAP Automate files so we could run the tests within CI/CD pipelines. And so we could scan any new changes to code when it was added. So here we can see a little demo of a ZAP Automate file where we configure the environment and all the jobs. This is not a realistic example, it's just a simplified version. Usually it contains more configuration. But here we can see a structured format for configuring ZAP Automate settings. It lets you configure target URLs, credentials for the test, you can pass usernames, passwords, and you can configure all the jobs. Here's a more detailed view of the jobs. So you can add authentication scripts, We can add open API Swagger definitions. We can add a spidering phase, which essentially does all the crawling for the URLs for you. You just have to enter one base URL and you can find all the other URLs in the application. And I think that's the main feature, but an active scan, which does all the scanning for the URLs you found in the spidering phase. And here is a large overview of the report generation. You can configure the risk levels you want to include in the report. You can include the templates and sections which you want to include. And we can see a Docker run command, which you can use to run the configurations. We'll not go into deep detail, but you can just pass the environment file and the configuration file, and you can start the test with just one command. And here's a big overview of the whole process of how a scan works. So first you specify your URLs, your API endpoints, you authenticate against them, you pass some request URL parameters, you do a scan, you generate a report, which includes all the vulnerabilities found during the scan, and then you can analyze the report. See a summary of the report, how it looks like. No specific data, just for visualization purposes. And alerts. Well, the findings are mostly false positives and informative. If you get some like high risk level or medium risk level alerts, doesn't mean your application has to be shut down immediately and thrown into the trash. It's fine. Mostly are false positives. And here we can see like full report, which includes the URL of the finding. Basically, in this case, ZAP found the vulnerable JavaScript library, and includes the solution, how to fix it, references. And talking about our use case, our project, during the analysis phase, the team reviewed the report generated by ZAP, and like in the previous example, most of the findings were just minor issues such as misconfigurations and informational findings. We did find one critical vulnerability, which pertained to the inclusion of a very, very large and not specific content security policy list. Just like here is an example. And that meant that individuals with access to the domains that were included in the not so specific content security policy could like create a resource within the allowed domain and access the state portal's sensitive resources or even exploit them. And as we found that, the team compiled a detailed report outlining all the identified vulnerabilities and also recommendations for remediation. And the report was then presented to the state institution, and everything was cool. We found some valuable insights on the state of the web applications and APIs. And for probably the part you all were waiting for, the demo of the GUI, we will see how the app authenticates and scans a web app automatically. I have added some sites for this demo. Right now we are configuring authentication. We are choosing the script-based authentication option, choosing the state portal authentication. And we are going to be adding a regular expression that identifies if the user is logged out or not. I'm going to be adding a user, so the ZAP knows which user to authenticate with. And then we're going to start a scan. Simple as that. Yeah, so as we start to scan the browser, it wants to be launched, which right now no one's touching the mouse, and Selenium is doing all the work. Basically, the authentication script is logging in right now, choosing the user, etc. So you can see we're logged in. Selenium closes the browser, checks the session cookies if they're correct, and we can see that the scan is starting. We're actively scanning some URLs while being authenticated, by the way. Alright, we're done with the demo. Gonna tell you some takeaways from this project. So after the completion of the project, after we presented the vulnerabilities to the state institution, we figured that we could use ZAP internally as well. We can test that that's. So currently we're not using the ZAP Automate protocol, but we're combining some manual pen testing with some tests through the ZAP GUI, also using authentication scripts. But yeah, I'm not using ZAP Automate within CI/CD pipelines. And thank you for your attention. We can start with some questions if you have them.
Does ZAP Automate also have some application for macOS?
Yes.
Yes. For macOS, I'm not sure, but you can definitely run ZAP GUI through through Docker using WebSwing, so you can basically run it on any operating system. Yes, please.
Is it like automatically scanning the HTML and just finding any fields which can be filled with the data, or it just somehow communicate with the APIs and finding that something can be triggered?
So essentially how it works, it grabs all the URLs you want to scan and has predefined scanning protocols, which basically goes through all the URLs and sends some malicious requests to them, which like modifies the URL parameters, tries to add some malicious cookies, tries to like manipulate with the authentication, tries to access some resources it shouldn't access.
So it actually contains like a vulnerability database already?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So yes, it contains a vulnerability database, and when you add some URLs, it tries to use the vulnerability database against all the URLs.
Yeah, but if you told this is open source, right?
Exactly.
Then who keeps the database? Did you notice how fast is the database updated towards the new vulnerabilities are found? Did you see the vulnerabilities?
Not sure about this, but well, the database with vulnerabilities is pretty excessive, but I'm not sure how often it is updated and who updates it.
I mean, sometimes auditors, for example, approve this penetration testing systems. So it means that the databases are somehow updated. Okay.
Yes.
Is it also finding some kind of vulnerabilities for the DDoS attacks, like for the constant pinging some endpoints and over performance of the existing application or databases, or it just scans the existing application, which, as I understood, you are defining which endpoints should be used there, or it finds it automatically?
Well, you have to define a specific URL. If you're scanning a web application, then the ZAP spidering phase reveals all the URLs within that web app. And if you're scanning an API, you have to import an open API Swagger definition so ZAP knows which URLs to scan for the API. And to answer your question, does it scan against DDoS attacks? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that is the main purpose of ZAP, no. It scans the URLs for like common vulnerabilities, such as like cross-site scripting, SQL injections, but it doesn't necessarily scan for DDoS attacks, no.
I think ZAP has some rules, but I think those for us were mainly false positives, because it tries to have large payloads in some requests, and if the response time is unusually large, it actually marks it as potential vulnerability. But most of the time that we saw those were actually false positives, because there was no regex expression or anything like that. That was mostly just larger server times, and so the answer is yes, they have such rules, but in our experience, those were mainly false positives.
Yes?
Did you have any problems regarding using Selenium? Selenium is often notorious with being outdated regarding browser update.
Well, it's always a challenge developing authentication scripts. I think that's the biggest challenge within ZAP. If you're running tests, well, authentication is the biggest challenge. And yes, definitely ran into some issues with Selenium. It was definitely a challenge developing the authentication script.
So did you, in a final decision, stick to some specific browser version, use log number?
I don't think we did. Just used Firefox headless. For the most part, for demo purposes, we used the basic Firefox version, which like opens up during the test. But with Firefox headless, authentication usually went pretty smoothly. Well, yeah, no specific version.
I can add to that. I think in context of ZAP, the browser doesn't really matter, because this is not an automated test. This is like just to grab the cookies from the authentication when the application is complete. So it doesn't really matter. It could even be an old Firefox version. As soon as we get to the cookies to establish the session, it works. So this is not like cross-browser testing or anything like this. So it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Can it be used as a replacement for Selenium?
Are there any replacements to Selenium?
I mean, so in Selenium you test the functionality of web application. Can you use ZAP for Selenium?
Are we talking specifically about authentication here, or just like fully testing the web app? In general.
It's fully tested.
Okay,
So
well,
like, for example, what says that user can log in, go to this section of the menu, add something, add comment or delete something.
yeah, so if we're not talking about specifically vulnerabilities, well, I think Selenium is a great tool if you're not searching for vulnerabilities. But if you want to like fully test a web app for like security breaches, I don't think that is the tool to use. You will definitely have to use ZAP or any other security tool. But just for simply testing functionality of the web app, yes, I think that's a good choice to just use Selenium. Yes?
I didn't notice it during your live demonstration. Is it only testing the application itself, or is it also testing the configuration of the web server, such as the TLS settings? For example, if they adhere to best practices?
I don't think it tests the configuration of the server. It essentially tests just the web app. And, well, in that context, it basically also tested the web app is even accessible.
Викиде to this question parameters of cookies, for example, from site, logs, so on, does it check?
Well, yes, it definitely tries to manipulate with cookies. Has some tests for that. Tries to, as far as I remember, it tries to add tries to manipulate with the policies, tries to add some malicious cookies which shouldn't be there, shouldn't exist there, tries to remove some cookies, and tries to see if that works. If you can remove some cookies and access some resources that should be under authentication. But to answer your question, I don't think it specifically checks if there's there's a cookie policy defined in the application, but it tries to manipulate with the cookies.
Is Latvia web safe now?
Not full stick.
We are never safe, like if you ask cybersecurity.
Well, web apps are never safe, I agree. Yes.
Sorry, guys, let's do it in person. Just it seemed me that everybody already asked, and now I see 4 hands, so it will take time. So let's have break now, and you come and ask Mārcis in person. Thank you, Mārcis.
Okay.